What a great morning. I picked that song specifically because of where we're going to be going in the sermon this morning. And I want us to realize that when we look at the book of Job, so often what our mindset is we're looking at the book of Job in terms of the suffering of Job. And how can I relate to the suffering of Job? And how can I find myself, when I'm suffering, implementing the things that Job did? And those are good. The things written aforetime are written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope, Romans 15 and verse 4. But when it comes to the suffering of Job, I think there are some questions that need to be answered in terms of how did his friends respond to him? I think sometimes we overlook that part. We stick with Job 1 and 2, and I've heard a lot of sermons. I've heard a lot of sermons on Job chapters 1 and 2 and the suffering that we endure in this world. But I want to talk about friendship. Friendship is vital. And I'm going to say this in the Lord's church: we should make friends of God's children, brethren. The closest to us on this earth ought to be those with whom we share the fellowship in the Lord's body. We ought to be those who are seeking out to be friends to others and allowing others in the Lord's church to become friends to us. What would we do without good friends? And let me say this: how precious are our friends to us? Do we truly let them know how truly important they are in our lives? The Bible has a lot to say about friendship. And I guess I could have led this morning, what a friend we have in Jesus, right? We know we have a friend in Jesus, but we ought to be the kind of friend toward others that Jesus is toward us. And we need to be those who understand the Bible talks about the signs of a good friendship. In Proverbs 18:24, we learn good friendship begins with me. A man that has friends must show himself friendly. Awfully hard to find friends if I'm not a friendly person, right? So it begins with me, and then there's that foundation. If we're looking at signs of good friendship, we're looking for somebody that is friendly and then has a foundation of love. In Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Are we those who truly understand the foundation of our friendship is that love, that sacrificial love one toward another? And then we find biblically as a sign of friendship is not just showing myself friendly and truly having that foundation of love, but friends lift each other up. In the wisdom writing of Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 9, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. And then he says this: woe to him who's left alone when he falls, for he will have no one to lift him up. Aren't there those times in our lives where we need somebody who's willing to listen to us? Brethren, let me say this: when a brother or sister calls you on the phone, don't brush them off. When they stop by the house and they're pouring out their heart, if they feel comfortable enough with you to let you know what's going on in their lives, that says something about you as a person and their friendship or desire to have a friendship with you. Most of us don't let people into our little world, do we? Most of us don't let friends know not just the good things, but our idiosyncrasies, our failures, our faults, our problems. We want folks to think we have a perfect life. Friends, a good friend, the sign of a good friendship is that we can share. We can be open with one another, and we can lift one another up. And so we have the signs of friendship, but the Bible also talks about the strengths of friendship. In Proverbs 27 and verse 9, the Bible says, ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by a hearty counsel. We're thankful we have friends to give us good counsel. My dad used to say this: if you can make one friend, one good friend in your life, you've done very well. If you do two, you've done exceptionally well. And brethren, I can say I have a multitude of friends on whom I can depend and call. And if you don't, then get busy about the business of friendship, and not just learning to have friends, but being a friend for somebody else. Find that strength in others that you might be able to give them good, wise, biblical counsel, and you can accept the same from them. In Psalm 1, blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in that law he meditates day and night. We need to be those who meditate day and night so we can be a good friend toward others, providing them with good godly counsel. Sometimes that counsel comes with pain. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Sometimes my friend tells me things, Guy. Sometimes my friend tells me things I need to know. We had a conversation yesterday. He was letting me know about my diet. There were some things I need to take care of. Sometimes it's a wound to receive counsel from a friend, but that friend does it because they love you and they want what's best for you. That's a strength in friendship. And then there's security in friendship. Friendship is a two-way street. Proverbs 27:10, do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. In other words, make friends with the people around you. And in order to do that, we need to show compassion as we ourselves are shown it from our friends. In Luke chapter 10 and verse 27, Jesus said, so he answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. In fact, Jesus said, do this and you shall live. That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? Today I want to look at three friends. And these friends are friends during the suffering of Job. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. If you don't have names for your next children, there's some great ones. Of the 40 chapters of the book of Job, 9 of them express views from these three friends of Job. Job had suffered so much, hadn't he? I mean, we read through those first chapters and we realize because, Miss Donna, we're on this side of it. It's easy for us because we can read and know what Job's facing is coming because God allowed it. And we know that God trusts Job. He trusts Job so much that he said to Satan, everything he has is in your power. Only you can't touch him. Right? Job 1. You know what our enemy did? He didn't spare a thing from Job. The next time you're tempted to think and give, as the Rolling Stones said, some sympathy to the devil, don't. He has no good in mind for you or for me. Everything Job had, he took away. Everything. Listen, even his own children. And you say, well, he left his wife. He didn't take his wife. You're right. Because he knew that would hurt Job even more. A suffering spouse affects the other spouse. When you see your spouse suffering, you yourself go through that with them. And she saw the great suffering. And listen, before you get too harsh on Mrs. Job, remember she lost everything and she lost her children too. You know what Satan does? Chapter 2. Oh, that wasn't even a test. That was nothing. Why, I'll tell you what, God, if you let me go down there and touch his skin, listen to what Satan said, skin for skin, all that a man has, he'll give for his skin. You let me touch his skin. You let me make him sick. God said, all right, you can touch his skin. You can't kill him. Dan, do we doubt that Satan brought Job just as close to death as he could possibly get him without killing him? When you read about Job and his suffering from the boils on his feet to his crown of his head and everywhere in between, when you read about his night sweats and his nightmares, you begin to have an understanding of just how badly Job suffered. And we're not told how long this was going on. We'll talk about that in a minute. How long that was going on before his friends arrived. But I want to talk about three things this morning with us. I want to talk, number one, about what his friends did right. If we want to learn from this, we can learn there were some things they did right, and we can do those things. Number two, we can learn what they did wrong. And number three, how can we be better friends. The Bible has so much to say about friendship, we ought to take a look at these things together. Number one, what did Job's friends do that was right? Well, in Job 2 and verse 11, they heard, didn't they? They heard what plight Job was under. They heard what things were being done to Job, and they were moved by those things, weren't they? Job's three friends heard of all the adversity that had come upon him. And each one came from his own place. Number one, they heard. The Bible is silent again as to the length of time between the time that Job endured these things and the suffering before his friends arrived. But we can assume it was a while. They had to come from their various places. But they were those who heard. You know, sometimes when it comes to suffering of others, we don't want to hear about it. We got our own troubles. I got enough of my own problems in my life to deal with. I don't need to deal with your problems. And sometimes that's the attitude people have. That's the attitude of the world, brethren. It ought never be the attitude of the church. It ought never be the attitude of any of us toward one another. You got your suffering, I got mine. You deal with yours. No, Galatians tells us we're to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. When these friends heard, right, number two, their intention is to come and comfort their friends. So they came. These friends inferred that their friend was in need. And their intention was so well placed. Right? They knew they needed to go and help their friend with his burden. It reminds me again of Ecclesiastes 4:9, two are better than one. I love the fact that we read about them here in verse 11. They came from their own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment together to come mourn with him and to comfort him. Brethren, they mourned. They made an appointment, meaning they planned it together. They got together and said, listen, we need to put the priorities of our life at this moment. We're going to put those on hold. We're not told what they did for a living, are we, Chuck? Don't know. One thing I do know is when they heard their friend was suffering, they put all those things on hold. They had to make an appointment for this. They made an appointment to get together and to go to Job. And brethren, they came and they mourned with him. To mourn means they simply expressed sympathy, had compassion on him. The key word in this text is not meant as a sign of pity, but a recognition of the magnitude of the evil done to Job. This may be why they were moved, by the way, toward wrong positions. They looked at Job and they thought, our friend, this great and mighty man, this man that was so known for his wisdom and so known for his work ethic, so known for his great marriage, so known for being such a great father, so known for all these wonderful things, and now he's suffering. It must have been, it has to be something he's done wrong. God would never do this to such a good man. And brethren, that's where we have problems. Sometimes we infer from something that's not even implied. And so they mourned with Job, and they comforted him. Verse 12 says, when they raised up their eyes from afar and did not recognize their friend, each one they lifted up their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. These friends were so moved emotionally with the suffering of their friend. Let me ask this question, brethren. Do we ever get that way anymore? Or have we become so calloused by the world and all the things that we see in it that it's hard for us to be moved with compassion this way? I can tell you from my experience in 30 years of preaching the gospel, there have been times I've walked into the hospital room and it's hard for me to hold it together, because I see the suffering that my brother or my sister is enduring. And in ways I realize there's nothing I can do at this moment for it. They're in the hospital, they're in the best place they can be, but watching them endure it is painful to me. I think about Job's friends. They did all these things right. Our response, what is our response to what we've seen so far? I want us to realize when we're looking at these men, we see them bearing one another's burdens. It's never wrong to seek to alleviate our brother or sister's burdens, to come to them, to mourn for them, to comfort them. Our love should motivate us to supply for their needs. Read 1 John 3. 1 John 3, 16 through 18. What does John tell us? If I have the means to supply for my brother, and I shut up he says, the old King James, bowels of compassion, how can I say the love of God dwells in me? Let us not love in word, right, but in deed and in truth. Will we simply mourn with a friend? Sometimes we know somebody's suffering at home. Maybe they're shut in. And they're dealing with this all by themselves. Will we pick up the phone? Will we write a letter? You know, younger kids don't understand that, do they? This thing called a letter. You know, they got emails and texts. I would say this: will you send a text? Thinking about you, praying for you. Brethren, there's so much we can do. These friends were willing to travel all this distance. I don't know how far this distance was, but it took a while for them to get there. They had to set an appointed day for them to come. Will we make the trip? I'm not trying to beat up on any of us. I'm looking back here at me too. I think about the response. I never had too many people talk about necessarily what words were said during a funeral of a loved one or during a time of suffering or loss. But I have had many through the years say that person came and brought me this, or that person came and did that for me. I remember, and many of us do, remember when Mark had COVID. Pick on Mark, he's not here. When Mark had COVID, I remember the sheriff's office stepping up and the ladies from the sheriff's office going to his house and cleaning his house and changing the sheets and washing his clothes and the dishes and making sure that when he got out of the hospital, he came back to a clean house. Took the food that would spoil out of the fridge and put fresh food in before he came back. Brethren, that's how we comfort one another. That's how we're there for one another. And so when I look at this, I see this response. All these things they did right? When Job's friends saw, they had this first impression on their eyes. They didn't recognize him. They lifted up their voice and wept. Their response was they sat down, verse 13, they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word. For they saw that his grief was very great. Be careful what you say during the time of someone's suffering. Sometimes it's just better for us not to say anything at all. I can remember back when I was at the School of Preaching, and there was a funeral service for a baby who had died in vitro. The baby did not make it full term, and so they held a funeral for it and for her. And one of the good sisters, I know, trying to comfort, came to the mother and said, "You're still young enough to have more." I know her words weren't meant to pierce and cause problems and heartache and tears, but brethren, that's exactly what it did. And most folks may not remember the kind words you say, but let me say this: they will remember every word that hurt them, because that's how our minds are set up. I remember years ago when my sister died, we had somebody show up at the funeral. And I know they wanted to encourage, but they said to my younger sister, "Well, you still have your dad, and you know he's going to be in heaven," as if to imply about my sister she was not. Brethren, a funeral is not a time for a judgment. Let me say that. I don't know any preacher that gets up when somebody has died and said, "Oh, Brother so-and-so was such a flagrant person, such a vile, evil person, he's in hell, but you got a chance." Brethren, that's not how we do that. That's not comfort. That's not encouragement. That's not strength. So be careful what you say. So what do we learn? They heard, they came, they mourned, they comforted. Brethren, we can take lessons from that, can't we? But what kind of a friend were they really when it came to Job and the negative things? What they did wrong is just as important to study as what they did right. It's not in human nature to accept helplessness for very long. And when you read through the book of Job, you get to chapter 3, and Job speaks from his heart. Brethren, I don't know of any one of us, if we were suffering that severely, who would not cry out in our desperation, why is this happening to me? And Job says, I just wish that God had let me die in my youth before I ever saw light. I wish I cursed the day of my birth. And I've talked to people who are that desperate. And I've learned one thing. Don't rebuke them. My Lord cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Had God forsaken him, brethren? But in that moment, maybe hearkening back to Psalm 22 to get people's attention that all of this certainly was prophesied. But I can also see my Lord in his human nature crying out in that moment, feeling forsaken. Just as David did when he penned it. And brethren, we need to let people have their feelings, don't we? We find him crying out, and what do? They've listened to him talk about it, and every speech thereafter, it starts out somewhat soft, as we find the responses beginning here in chapter 4 with Eliphaz. And Eliphaz's conclusion is, yes, Job, you have done wonderful things. Yes, Job, you are a great person, but there must be something amiss that you've missed, and you need to bring that before God so you can be forgiven for it, so this suffering can stop. And I see Chuck and I talked about this yesterday, I see a very soft answer with Eliphaz at first. But every speech and every one of his friends from this point forward gets harsher and harsher and harsher in his response to Job. I want you to realize, without any real understanding of the situation, they began to reach wrong conclusions. And what did they accomplish when they had these speeches before Job? What did they accomplish with Job? I want to look at it from Job's perspective and his responses to them. In chapter 6 and verse 14, Job says, I have no pity from you. To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. Even if I had done what you're accusing me of, where's the pity? Brother, can we empathize with that when we're suffering? Can we empathize with the fact that even if I've done terrible things, where's the pity on behalf of you toward me in the beginning, initially? Chapter 19 and verse 21, Job says, have pity on me. Have pity on me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you persecute me as God does? And are not satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. I'm thankful they are. Not only did Job feel no pity from them, he felt his friends were deceitful. He says, my brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice into which the snow vanishes. Job, what are you talking about? Oh, like a deceitful brook, one that disappears. You're my friends. And what happens? Their friendship just disappears amidst my trial. Moreover, brethren, they started out in their comfort, but what did they do? They ended up bringing Job more pain and suffering. Number 3, Job felt like they weren't listening to him. In chapter 13 and verse 3, but I would speak to the Almighty and desire to reason with God, but you forgers of lies, you are all worthless physicians. Oh, that you would be silent and it would be your wisdom. Alicia, there's wisdom in silence sometimes, isn't there? Just if you don't say anything. That's what he's telling them. Oh, that you'd be silent, and it would be your wisdom. Now hear my reasoning and heed my pleadings of my lips. I think of this sometimes, Michael, when God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? 2 ears because we need to listen. We need to. And one mouth to answer, and even that, the tongue is hedged around by a guardian, right? Teeth. Keep that tongue secure. Because as sure as you open your mouth, you're going to say something. And sometimes when you say something, in fact, many times when we say something, it is not the right thing to say at the moment. Just be silent. And then Job said, your words are just torturing me. In Job 19 and verse 2, how long will you torture me with your words? And what I'm saying to us, brethren, in all of this that they came to comfort him and to be with him, Job ends up believing or feeling or thinking, I'm just all alone. In Job 7 and verse 6, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. They're spent without hope. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never see good. The eye of him who sees me will see no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. I'm just all alone in this, and I'm just going to disappear, and nobody's going to care about it. And then he went from that to wanting to be alone. Ever happened to you, Mike? Ever feel you're suffering through something? You just feel, just leave me alone. I think that happens to us at times. Chapter 7, verse 16, Job said, I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone. When our comfort makes our friends feel more alone, it's not comfort, brethren. Why did Job feel this way? It seems their comfort shifted to accusations. I'm just going to give you a couple of the highlights. Eliphaz stated in chapter 4 and verse 7, remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or where is the upright ever cut off? Job, you're suffering. It has to be the case because you know no matter when the case looks back, they suffer because they did wrong. That was his assessment. Bildad said in chapter 8 and verse 6, if you were pure and upright, surely now God would awake for you and prosper your rightful dwelling place. He'd restore you if you're righteous, but you're not, Job. Zophar in chapter 11 and verse 5, but all that God would speak and open his lips against you, that would show you the secrets of wisdom. Job, you think you're so wise? Oh, if God, you're complaining because God's not listening, God's not answering you, God's not talking to you. Remember, this is the age of the patriarchs. You're all upset because God's not talking to you. Job, you know what the problem is? If he opened his mouth, he put you in your place. Imagine, dear brethren, how those words must have cut Job's heart, caused him to doubt his salvation and his state before God. Remember, we have the advantage of reading chapters 1 and 2, and we know Job is suffering innocently. But Job doesn't know that, and neither do his three friends. Remember what Jesus told Peter on one occasion? Peter, Satan has desired you to sift you as wheat, but I've prayed for you. Brethren, we need to be more like Jesus. I don't know if my brother or sister may be suffering because of their own words or their own actions or their own inactions. But one thing I do know from this, I should have pity. And I should encourage them and pray for them and strengthen them and help them. So what are some lessons we can learn about being a friend? Show up in times of suffering, brethren. Donna, does suffering make you feel uncomfortable? Does me. When I see my friends suffering, when I see someone who's going through a hard time, I know they're having difficulty in life, man, it's hard for me to show up because I just don't, I feel uncomfortable. What do I say? Well, I think we've already covered that, haven't we? Michelle, we probably don't say anything. These friends were the best comfort to Job when they just sat with him in silence for 7 days. Sometimes it's just good for us to sit around and just let things play out. These three friends showed up. True friends show up when you're hurting, even if they don't have the right words. Number 2, be willing to mourn. Blessed are those who weep. I read that in a book somewhere. Remember that, Matthew 5? One of the Beatitudes is about mourning. I know we're probably mourning over our sins there, but Is it not true we ought to mourn with our friends in their suffering? Romans 12. We rejoice with those who rejoice. Oh, that's easy. But then the text says, weep with those who weep. That's not easy. Empathy involves entering into somebody else's pain, brethren, physically or symbolically. Number 3, don't assume the suffering is deserved. I think we beat that a little bit today. But brethren, we ought not to assume that. Avoid statements like, maybe you brought this on yourself, or everything happens for a reason, or you made your bed, lie in it. Brethren, that does nothing to help anybody. And here's a biggie. If you get nothing else out of the sermon this morning, take this one home with you. Don't prioritize being right over being kind. Y'all follow me here? I know this is right. I'm not saying don't stand on biblical principle. What I'm saying is sometimes we get it in our mind that we're right about this thing and we're going to stand on that above and beyond any mercy or kindness toward others. That is not biblical. The friends of Job focused on explaining theology, defending God rather than comforting Job. At least what they thought God was doing or not doing. But then that enters into the realm, I think, of a presumptuous sin. And friendship, being present and compassionate, is often far more important than proving a point. And then lastly, as I just mentioned, don't speak presumptuously about God. God himself rebukes Job's friends in chapter 42 and verse 7. Listen to what God told those 3 friends. You have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Could you imagine standing before God and God says, you've not spoken the truth about me? That scares me to death. Be careful when speaking on behalf of God, especially when dealing with the pain that others are feeling. I think the account of Job's friends is a mirror. It's a mirror for us to look into. James describes God's word as a mirror, right? We get to see ourselves as God sees us. Here's this mirror, and it reminds us how easy it is to speak too soon, to judge too quickly, to comfort too poorly. It also shows the deep impact of simply being there for a friend. Sometimes the most godly and loving thing a friend can do is just sit quietly, to bear up the burden with those that are suffering. Be a good friend. Be present in times of joy, but also in times of pain. Speak the truth, but speak it in love. Ephesians 4 and verse 15. Proverbs 27 and verse 6, as paraphrased by me. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. I know God has my best interest at heart when he says mean things to me. You see, speak the truth in love. Friendship is not flattery, brethren. It's accountability wrapped up in compassion. Encourage and build up. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 11. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as each of you are already doing. Brethren, I think that last phrase speaks to the church here. I'm grateful for all of you who encourage each other and build one another up. Lastly, forgive and be gracious. Colossians 3:13. Bear with each other. Let me stop there for a second. Miss Gail, sometimes you got to bear with me. I like the shirt that says, be patient, God's not finished with me yet. Sometimes we got to bear with one another. Troubles come. I make dumb choices. I like the other shirt. I wouldn't wear it, but it's true of me. Beware, I do stupid things. Sometimes I do. I'm thankful for good brethren who will bear with me and be patient with me and gracious to me. Don't hold grudges. Extend the grace that Christ gave to you. Remember, love covers a multitude of sins. If you need to be reconciled to somebody, take that step. Do your part. Reflect the friendship of Christ. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Am I willing to lay down my life for my brother, for my sister? Jesus showed that, the ultimate example. And you know what he said? Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. We're to have the mind of Christ when it comes to all of these aspects. We can have no better friend than Jesus. That is true. So I hope the lesson has been encouraging for you this morning and helpful to you, especially as you enter into a new week. May it encourage you in your walk with those around you, those with whom you work, those with whom you love, and those with whom you fellowship in the church.